Well, if you're watching this section, then you probably haven't lost faith in me as, not having lost my mind yet. But this is part 2 on basically as much detail as I can gather about what's happening in T-minus 3 days now. Alright, go ahead and check back on section 1, part 1, to see where this started. And you can always look at my previous videos, or you can always do a whole bunch of research on your own. But I talked about Fort Carson, I talked about the Spetsnaz, and how shit's getting scary there. Next, I'm going to talk about Occupy and Anonymous. Basically a quick breakdown about what we know about them. Alright. I'm grouping them together because they've already openly allied with each other, and they're pretty much the same people anyway. Anonymous, as you know, we are Legion, we are blah blah blah, okay? And Occupy, we've been force-fed this when it first started, and then it died down on the mass media, but all along we were able to see it on YouTube. Occupy and Anonymous. Alright, what we know is they are gaining a socialist leaning. Alright, basically the people that were leading it before are not the same people who are leading it now. Alright, and that's mainly true with Occupy. Let me get that out in the open. But we're grouping Anonymous along with it. It's just as easy to infiltrate Anonymous, since anybody can be anonymous, alright? Alright, and it might not even be an infiltration, but you'll see. 2, supported by Obama. You've already seen plenty of the Obama administration's bills, executive orders, and all that stuff that are basically smacking of some socialist tendencies. Alright, and Obama's already gone out and said that he supports the Occupy movement. That was a while ago, but you know what, he went and said it. Possibly sparked by globalist elite. Now, I haven't been able to find any conclusive proof, although I have seen videos detailing connections between the Illuminati card game and the actual Arab Spring uprisings and stuff like that. And it's very easy to picture that happening with Occupy. It's amazing how things like this can spring up overnight on YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and all that shit. Open talk of revolution in the United States of America. Alright. Now, my friend told me that he was able to find videos of basically people urging occupiers and Anonymous to actually bring weapons with them to occupy Chicago. I wasn't able to find that per se, although I imagine it would be very easy for the powers that be to take that off of the internet so the rest of us don't get to see it. But what I have been able to see with my own eyes, several recent videos by Anonymous and a little bit into Occupy, basically straight out saying that this is a revolution, that this is a rebellion against the United States of America's government, specifically the government, alright, not the people. They're supposed to be representing the people, but I think that's part of the plan. Occupy will be at Chicago on 5/20/2012. I actually wrote that before I saw this specific video. Apparently they actually showed up on May Day, and they will be staying until the end of May at the very least. That probably goes for Anonymous as well. There's also a new group that sprung up called the Sons and Daughters of Liberty. So there's a lot of these groups that are springing up, either as a result of Occupy and Anonymous, or in counter to them, or just people enacting their own ideas. All amounts to basically the same thing. I think what we're looking at is within the next couple of days, we're probably going to see a lot of people hunkering down in Chicago. We got the Black Bloc infiltration, and I've seen some inconclusive evidence to support the idea that the Black Bloc is actually federal or police personnel disguised as these protesters. Are they anarchists? Well, they might be anarchists if they actually just are that element of it, or if they have been planted by the federal government, I should say, or by police. Then obviously they're not anarchists. It's all part of the plan. Either way, these guys are some bad news. I saw footage of them during the May Day riots in Seattle, smashing windows and just running and basically being maniacs and causing disturbances. Quick note again about the Spetsnaz. Spetsnaz foments revolution. Just like any other special forces unit in the world, that is one of their capabilities as part of their irregular warfare, right? Their non-conventional warfare policies. On the right here, I listed a couple of other well-known movements that may or may not show up. All right, and up at the top, I have Sovereign Citizen. That's a movement I referenced a couple days ago. Or was it yesterday? A quick word about them. Basically, they believe that they do not owe any sort of loyalty to the federal government, that their level of loyalty ends at the county level with the sheriff department, possibly extending into the state. However, I don't see evidence to support that. And when I first heard about these guys, I was thinking, how could people possibly be so freaking insane? I've seen video footage of them shooting cops. Cops just doing their job. The cops weren't harassing them or anything from what I could see. Cops are just doing their job, stopping people because they saw something out of the ordinary that smacked of being against the law. Sure as shit, these guys pulled out an automatic freaking AK-47 and shot them. So that's number one on the list, on the hit parade. Excuse me. Alright, we've also got the Black Panthers along with the KKK. And, I added those to the list simply because they tend to show up at places. I wouldn't be surprised to see small amounts of them, at least, in Chicago. Neo-Nazis, you don't really hear too much about them, but they are out there. They're just like in Europe. The Nazi Party is coming back into power in Germany. I have a 25% support base right now, from what I heard. And here in America, it's not so big, and a lot of it is just people that just think they have an idea of what the ideals of the Nazi Party were, but the Nazi Party was National Socialism. And there's that connection. Socialist leanings, Obama and his socialist policies have openly supported Occupy. And then I included many others as well as militias. They might show up for the party as well. NATO summits are always going to be huge when it comes to people protesting it. A lot of people don't like this coalition and haven't. A lot of people don't like what NATO's doing with their drone attacks. Mainly that's the United States, but I believe other countries do have drones now as well. That's another thing you can look up into. Where do they stop calling them UAVs and start calling them drones? doesn't matter. All right. So that's pretty much who's going to be invited to the party, or who's going to be crashing the party. All right. The next section is going to seem a little bit off topic, but it all connects. We got China. They're in the game. They're in on the game as well. According to my friend, they own about 80% of the United States debt. I looked into that, and that's pretty much right. 80% of U.S. debt. Right now, we're, I believe, $17 trillion in debt. And about 80% of that is more than $12 trillion. So the percentage isn't exact, but you get the picture. They basically own America. 17,000 troops in the Western Hemisphere, in places like, I believe he said, Venezuela. There's troops in South America, basically, ready to go at a moment's notice if they decide to get froggy. All right, they have the potential for millions of conscripts. All right, China has the largest population out of any single nation in the world. Over 1 billion people, if I'm not mistaken. And a lot of those can be pressed into service at a moment's notice. A lot of AK-47s out there. They are actively buying U.S. land and corporations, specifically banks, but I guarantee they're going to be branching outward from there. Now, this is a little bit more in the future. I don't believe China is going to play a huge role specifically in May 20th, but they're buying land. They're basically making little bits of China in America. What are they going to do with that land? They can form cities. If it's their land, if it's part of their sovereignty, they could easily build military bases in there, and there's not a whole lot we could say about it, considering the fact that they still own us. And we discussed this, possibly take U.S. citizens as collateral. We already know that China is a communist government, or socialist, or whatever you want to call it. Basically, it's totalitarian. The people don't have a say in anything. The government says what's going to happen, and then it happens. And I don't believe that they have much more regard for human life than the power elite do. Basically, resources to them, as it is becoming to NATO and the UN. If you want to read into the whole Agenda 21 thing, that plays into it too. I didn't write that down because that's not a part of the matter at hand, but you'll see down the line if this shit continues. Alright, so that's China's role. They can bring a huge amount of people to the United States if given the opportunity or the incentive to do so. The incentive, of course, being they probably want their money's worth out of the United States. So if the shit hits the fan, you can expect to see a large number of Chinese troops. Let's get into the exact day. All right. Basically, what I did was I outlined what we believe to be basically the plan. And if you look at this, at this point, we're 3 days away. No matter what happens in Chicago, unless somehow, by a miracle, everything stays peaceful, which it probably won't. We've already seen the track record of, Occupy. Unless everything stays peaceful, no matter what happens, this shit's basically going to go down. Remember how I was talking to you about the SURF-P unit? Stands for the... I'm not gonna try again. He corrected me on that, but I keep forgetting. I should have written the full thing down anyway. This is the Big Blue Arrow chain of events, according to the global elite. 5/20, NATO summit in Chicago. All right. Occupy's already there. But you got the beginning of the summit. We're looking at the probability of the protest closing in. All right, of course, they're going to be as close as they can possibly get without actually being there. All right, basically at the cordon of police forces. 3, agents incite deadly force. I think that's what's been happening all along. That's just my take on it. All right, we already mentioned Spetsnaz being masters of infiltration. That's both into enemy military compounds as well as disguised as civilians. They can go anywhere. They can basically be anybody, and nobody would be the wiser. With their perfect American language skills, they probably have extensive training in our culture. Anybody see the movie Salt? Pretty good idea of what goes on with the Spetsnaz. Alright, so we're looking at possibly agents inciting deadly force, or people just doing it on their own. Either is very possible. Throwing a Molotov cocktail, closing in a little bit too far on the cops. Alright, I believe I mentioned a while ago your rules of engagement, and pretty much at the bottom of every ROE card they ever showed us, it said nothing in these rules of engagements prevents you from using deadly force in defense of your life. All right, basically, if you think that you stand a significant chance of being attacked with deadly force. All right, now I believe that applies to the police as well at this point in time. All right, number 4, Chicago Metro Police Department responds, deploys SWAT teams, maintains their perimeter at all costs. Their job is to protect the NATO summit, and they're going to do that. They're going to maintain the perimeter. They're going to bring in the SWAT, the heavy guns, and they're going to do their best. But we're looking at probability of thousands of protesters against a couple hundred of police. The odds don't look too great. And I think the reason why it's going to go down this way is because it'll be perfect PR for the government afterwards. All right, that's what we've been talking about too. If the police fire the first shot or U.S. military fires the first shot, it's going to be a huge scandal, and people are going to be in a riot all over the nation, possibly the world. But if it's the rioters that fire the first shot or throw the first cocktail, they have their plausible deniability. They were right. They did what they had to. Right? 6, Rahm Emanuel and the Illinois governor deploy the Surf P team. All right, their riot team of about 100 to 120 personnel, possibly more. All right. While those guys are getting into the mix, all right, they will probably deploy 1 or more combat brigades. I was informed of the fact that a couple of years ago, when it was simply a matter of a lot of violence in Chicago, that they tried to get Army combat brigades activated in Chicago streets in order to quell all the violence. That didn't go through, but this would be a perfect opportunity for them to say, yep, we told you so, we were right, can we do it now? And there we go. There we go. Then you've got active duty Army personnel, and if you're not familiar with what a brigade is, 1 combat brigade is 3 battalions of roughly 1,000 personnel each that are combat capable. So that's roughly 3,000, probably more like 4,000 troops, because they almost always hold a battalion in reserve. And just like with the Marines, the headquarters element and non-combat elements can actually be deployed as combat troops. So you've got anywhere from 3,000 to 4,000 all the way up to 8,000 possibly. All right, and that's with 1 brigade and its support elements. All right, there are I believe the maximum, or I shouldn't say the maximum, but the number they were looking for at the time was 5 brigades to be ready. So we could be looking at that as well. And then finally, number 7, Chicago gets evacuated and it gets placed under total lockdown. Both of those may occur, or just one of those may occur. If it gets evacuated, a good portion of citizens are going to be put into FEMA temporary shelters and camps, which may or may not be set up as prisons at that point. But then again, once they contain the city and they start organized patrols throughout the streets, they can very easily keep the city on lockdown without evacuating anybody. And that might actually be the more efficient of the two options. But again, both of them could be there. People could be evacuated, specifically dissenters, all the people in the actual movements. We're moving on 21 minutes now, so I'm going to cut it short there. I'll move into the last section in a couple of minutes, and you'll see it again in a couple of hours once this video and the first video are finished uploading. All right. I didn't mention it before, but go ahead and copy this, mirror it, cut, paste, favorite it. Just spread it out there because we're running low on time. All right? Do what you can. Be right back.